Hi everyone and welcome to the Colour Cave where we like to play with art stuff. My name is Jem and we are going to tackle the grid method for drawing from a photograph for reference. Some people had asked me and commented on some of my doggy drawings that I like to do, and those drawings are people's specific pets, and the grid method is a really accurate and helpful way, especially if you're relatively new to drawing, to get that pinpoint perfection and exact lines. So I'm going to run through the way that I would do it and the reasons why I do it for you today. So let's just get to top down view and we can get going. Now, when using the grid method, the first thing we need to know is what size of paper you're going to be sketching on, and I am going to be working in portrait on this A4 pad. Now this is important in order to get your reference picture right for setting up your grid. What I did was I took my photograph and I scaled it to fit on an A4 sheet of paper, and I printed it off just on normal printer paper in that A4 format. Now it doesn't have to be perfect round the edges. This is Rebus, by the way. This is a lady that I know. It's her dog and I am drawing him for her, and I'm going to give it to her as a Christmas present, so it's a surprise. Yeah, so the edges and everything aren't exactly required. You can see the paper's been sitting in my printer slightly offset, and I've got a margin on this side and not on this side. But we're actually in the process of making our grid. We are going to crop this down slightly, so you don't have to panic about things like that. As long as your subject matter is in the middle, that means it's going to translate onto your paper in the middle, so you don't have to get too hung up on it. So the other things that you're going to need once you have your photograph printed out is you're going to have a ruler. I like to use a transparent one, and it's just so that I can see where I'm drawing in my lines when I'm marking out the grid. An HB pencil or a dark pencil for actually drawing your grid on, and a fine liner to go over the top of it with that once you've got the grid drawn out. And then after that you're just on to whichever drawing pencils you prefer for sketching onto your actual paper. Now there are programs in this modern day of technology, there are programs that will let you superimpose a grid on top of your photograph in digital form, and you can print the whole thing off. I would advise against it, particularly if you're new to this, and I will explain as I go why it's better to do the old school method, and I found it help when I was learning to do the grid method. First steps are to frame your subject matter, and that just means cropping by hand instead of cropping, you know, as you would on any sort of software. So looking at the bottom of Rebus here, he's got his little toy, and I don't really want that to be part of the picture because I think it's going to detract from his lovely face, because he is absolutely gorgeous. He's such a lovely dog. I'm going to cut him off about here, and that is just so I will draw in like an extra bit of his leg here, but we'll not worry too much about that. So just to make sure that I'm keeping this square, I am measuring one ruler width up from the bottom and marking in these lines, and I'm doing it really heavily. You might not be able to see them on this photograph here, but as long as you can see them when you're doing it, that's fine. And I think I'm going to cut them off about here so that you can see this part of his legs. And as I say, I'll just draw in a little bit here, and you know, we'll sort of make that a bit up as we go along. There's nothing wrong with that, that's artistic license. So the first thing I want to do with that is now measure up roughly to where I want to be, which is about 2 centimetres is going to cut across about here, so we'll go with that. So all I'm doing is marking up 2 centimetres, and again, it doesn't matter what kind of increments you want to work in, as long as you stay in the same increments. Don't jump from centimetres to inches, because that's just going to get really confusing. So that's me. I've now anchored the bottom part of where my sketch is going to finish, so I'm just going to draw that line in all the way across, like so. Nice and heavy so that I can see it, because there's nothing worse when you're doing something as complicated as this. There's nothing worse than not being able to see your lines and them not being clear. Now at the top, because I'm working in centimetres, I want to find a point that's going to suit me, but that is also going to be preferably an even number from where the bottom of my image is, and that's just for ease of counting and marking out your grid. So I think I want to be about here somewhere. So there's 20 centimetres up from the bottom. Seems to be good for me. So again, just the same thing, and I'm doing the same from the bottom here. I'm just marking up 20 centimetres from my line that I've drawn in, not from the original line. So that's you. You've then got your top and bottom lines if you just want to draw them in. When you're doing this, it is actually better if you stand up to do it. Obviously I'm not going to do that because I've got the camera set up and my big head would be in the way. But when you're viewing from a seated position, it's your perspective's actually slightly skewed. So if you're looking straight down on the top, you'll be able to see how straight your lines are. Okay, so what we know now is that from the bottom of our sketch, the top of our sketch is going to be 20 centimetres. So that's the first thing that you've got in your head. In terms of working across the way, I'm actually quite lucky in that Rebus's head, which is obviously the focal point of the picture, is actually quite central. It's not far off it, so I am not going to move that about too much. I'm just going to draw down the line of the margin where the actual photograph stops. So we'll pop that in. So I've got my line down the side now, and I'm just going to use the edge of the paper as the line on this side. Now I'm leaving that for a quite selfish reason as well. I am left-handed, so when I'm working on them, I've actually got somewhere to rest my hand when I'm working on the finer details, and I'm not going to smudge too much in the graphite, but that's just that's an aside. Okay, so here comes the bit where we actually do our grid. Now this is the reason why I suggest, and I find it easier to do it by hand. In measuring out these lines and physically putting them on your photograph, it makes you pay attention to where these lines are intersecting with the subject of your photograph, and it's just a step that helps you recognise where your sketch lines are going to go. And as a beginner or as a newer drawing artist, that is something that's very, very helpful. It's a bit like looking at a map before you leave on a journey. You know, it's that little sort of preview. Or if you are trying to spell a word, sometimes it's easier to write it down before you actually spell it out loud. If we look across the way now and we measure all the way along here, now completely by accident, this is going to be just spectacular, and see, I didn't even do it on purpose, but wait till you see this. Rebus is now perfectly 20 centimetres by 20 centimetres. Now I did not do that on purpose, but it's just turned out that way. So he is a perfect square, which is nice. So if you are a very, very new artist and your drawing skills are at a foundational level, we want to do small squares, because when we actually go on to start working on the sketch, you're going to be working in each square at a time to begin with. So the smaller those squares are, the less detail and the less complex the interior of that square is. So if we go in 1 centimetre increments, and all I'm going to do is work my way along my ruler and just make sure I'm marking quite heavily, especially on the parts of them that are dark, so that I can see. And I'm just marking in centimetre boxes all the way along here. Now you are going to end up with a lot of squares, but that's actually helpful because you have smaller areas to work in and you can take your time. So I've marked them all along the bottom, and I'm just going to do the same along the top now. Like so, and then we just join them up, and that will give us our top to bottom lines. And again, it's better if you stand up to do this, because you'll get a much better perspective on these lines. So just using my HB pencil here, I'm just working my way along. I am not doing anything technical, I am drawing a line with a ruler. Now the reason we want to do it in pencil to begin with is just so that if you make a mistake, you don't have to print out your entire image again. You can just erase your lines and you can put in a new one. Although we are leaning heavily, you will be able to take away enough of the graphite so that it doesn't interfere with the actual subject in the photograph, and also enough that you won't get confused between your old line and your new line, because obviously the new one you put in, you'll lean heavily again. Okay, so now we've got our up and down lines. Looks as if he's in prison, bless him. And all we're going to do is repeat this process and do the lines across the way. So the same thing, 1 centimetre increments either side, and then join them up. The other thing to do is make sure that you keep your pencil sharp, because it will get blunt as you go along, and you want those lines to be nice and precise. So here's an interesting point. If I just zoom in a little bit now while I'm doing this, as I'm drawing my lines in here, what I was talking about earlier in actually seeing where the squares are intersecting, the first thing that I've picked up is that where this line intersects is actually the middle of Rebus's pupil, so that would be a really good place to start my drawing. Now if I had printed out my image with a grid on it digitally, I wouldn't have picked up on that, but I'm just aware that these round this area, the quartiles surrounding it, I'm aware of the shape of his eye and how it's fitting in round that point. So that's something that's really helpful. The other thing that I'm noticing straight away as well is that all of his eyeball of his other eye is within one square. So again, that's another really good place to start. These are the kind of things that you observe that are helpful to you if you're new to this kind of thing. And there we have it, that is our grid ready. So it's very clear which parts are the actual subject matter, what it is you're actually going to draw, and it means you can disregard the rest entirely, and that's not going to be an issue for you. So if you are a little bit more advanced and you would say that your drawing skills are middling or intermediate, what you can do, and also as a new person as you practice, you can make these squares bigger. So to begin with, when you're a beginner, you want to work in very, very small squares because it makes it nice and simple for you for picking out the features that you want to do. For example, at random, if you pick this square here, you're only having to draw in that one tiny line and then you can move on to the next one. And it's the same for the shading as well. It's much, much easier to start your shading and figure out where the light patches and the dark patches are if you're only working one square at a time. Now for the level of drawing that I am at currently, and for the number of these that I have done, I would not work in 1 centimetre squares. But the idea is that each time you try it, or when you feel confident enough to do it, you can make those squares slightly bigger. So you would go 2 by 2, so the squares are obviously going to be double the size of this, and so on and so forth, until you're maybe only working in a set of 6 squares and you're comfortable enough and your perspective and your eye coordination is good enough to draw in without having to do these little details. Okay, so once you've got your pencil lines down, you want to ink them in with your fine liner. Now I have made some augmentations here to show you what I was talking about. I am going to work in 2 centimetre by 2 centimetre squares. So all I have done is fill in every second line, and I have erased the pencil line slightly. Now the advantage to doing this, again, if you're not entirely confident, if I show you in this square down here, because that one's quite visible, by leaving these faint lines, which was the original 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre, if I get to a part of the drawing that I'm struggling with, I'm able to break it down that bit further. So let's see, we were talking about his eyes earlier on. So when I'm initially doing my sketch, I want to be working in this 2 centimetre by 2 centimetre box to draw the shapes in. If I'm struggling with that, I can still see the original lines, and I can see that his eyeball, as I talked about earlier, is in this bottom right hand quartile of this particular square. So it's like having extra guidelines or a set of training wheels if you are going to go to bigger squares in time. So that's really, really helpful. The other augmentations that I've made just as I was going along there is that I have cut off this part at the side because I feel it's surplus to requirements. So what that's done is it's left me with an odd number of centimetres. So down this right hand side I only have 1 centimetre lines. Now this really doesn't matter as long as you make sure that you're transcribing your grid exactly as it is in the photograph onto your sketch paper. As long as you keep the two the same, it doesn't matter, but this is just an aesthetic preference. To begin with, I would suggest trying to stick to even numbers just so that you're keeping things as simple as possible. So now that our grid is ready, we can draw the same grid out onto our paper. Now the only thing that's really sort of the issue, it's not the issue. The only thing I will say about doing this is be careful of the placement of your grid, because remember, you want your picture to be as central as possible. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. And what I've got to remember now is my grid is now 20 centimetres by 19 across. So when I'm drawing it in, I have to decide where I'm going to place it because this is an A4 sheet of paper. So think about your grid in reference and in relation to its position on the paper and the size of your paper. Obviously, whichever size of paper you choose is entirely up to you. Now, when I'm drawing my grid on my paper, I like to use, I'm just digging it out of my pencil case, I like to use an F pencil. Now, an F grade pencil is somewhere between an HB and an H, if I'm not mistaken. It is very, very faint. It is very, very fine. And I think the F stands for fine. I'm sure it stands for fine. And you want to keep this as light as possible, because the last thing you want when you've finished your beautiful graphite sketch that you've taken hours and hours and hours on is to be able to see all these big ugly grid lines. When I have these side by side, now this is the advantage to having the same size of paper as the photograph is on. It's quite easy for you to judge just by sort of, you know, moving it about slightly where you want your grid to start. So I'm looking at the bottom part here, and the bottom of my paper is here. So I kind of think somewhere around there would probably be good, because he's a little bit high up in the photograph, and as I said before, we're actually cutting this part off, so to compensate for that we're going to move him down slightly. So I think about there. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, because realistically people that are looking at your picture aren't going to be looking at the top and bottom, they're going to be looking at well, hopefully they'll be looking at the main point. So if I just stick a rough guideline along there, and I'm not actually going to draw in a full line, but just a couple of marks on the paper so that I know roughly where I'm going to be drawing my line in. And what I want to do then is measure up from the bottom, because obviously you want to make sure that this is level. You don't want this line sitting at an angle, or else your whole drawing is going to be slightly off. In some cases that won't matter a great deal, but start as you mean to go on. So if I just measure up from the bottom of this page, that's roughly 7 centimetres up. So I'm just going to make it 7. 7's going to push it slightly further up. But again, just for ease of counting, we don't want to make this any more complicated than it already is, because I know, and I'm not insulting anybody's intelligence, and I'm not trying to be clever or anything, but I know that some people do genuinely struggle with the grid method. So I want to try and make it as easy as possible, you know, and try and explain it in a simple way as possible. Because the last thing you want to do, you know, you're going to be spending, you know, the best part of anything between 10 and 20 hours on one of these drawings, so you don't want to make it any more difficult than it really has to be. Anyway, once you're happy with your measurement, just rub this off, you want to put the faintest of lines, and you want to draw that in. I usually go two strokes where the pencil is just touching the paper. I'm not actually putting any pressure on it. That seems to work for me. So that is my bottom line. And now all I need to do is measure up my 20 centimetres up each side. So I find it easier to turn the paper to do this. I don't know why, but I just do. But if I measure 20 up, so that's going to come to about there. And then do the same on the other side. And again, just a very light mark so you can just see it no more. So that's you got your top and bottom. Again, we're just doing the same thing, nothing different. Very lightly, 2 strokes for me. Get your mind out the gutter. Okay, so my middle part we've now decided is 19 centimetres. So what I want to do is make sure that's centred. So the paper is 21 and I'm looking for 19. So that's convenient. So I can leave a centimetre each side of a gap. And then that will give me my 19 centimetres in the middle, which is perfect. So again, I'm just going to do exactly the same at the top. I'm going to mark in 1 centimetre each side. Now by doing this, it just means again that the image is going to be as centred as possible on the paper. So try and keep those measurements to something that's easy for your brain to work out. And then I can just draw these lines in. Again, if you can do this standing up, all the better. Or if you're working on even better if you're working on a drawing board, you know, like an easel board. Right, so now you've got your, what I call the frame, the photo frame. And all we're going to do now is replicate our grid. Now on this copy here, I am only going to put in my 2 by 2 centimetres squares, so my inked squares. I am not going to draw in the intermediate ones, you know, the 1 centimetre quartiles. I can use that for a reference because this is my reference, but I really don't want to have to rub out any more lines than I have to, so I'm going to stick to 2 by 2. If you are new, draw them in 1 by 1. It's no, you've got to learn, and the whole point about this is precision, and it will help you to be precise. So gauge it for yourself. I think I'm actually at the stage personally where I could probably go up to 3 by 3. and I think that I might try that in one of my next drawings and just see how I get on, because the good thing is you can always go back and break them down. If you think you've taken it too far and you're finding that the squares are, you know, are too big, you can always take that step back and add in, you know, an extra centimetre or whatever. So that you can always do that on your reference drawing. Alright, and that is my grid all drawn in, so I am now ready to rock. You can barely see these lines on the camera, but that means I've done my job right, because we want these lines to be as light as possible. Now, getting started, this is the main benefit of using the grid method, because in order to get these lines accurate, one of the first things you have to do is get your outline correct of your subject, and this is why I love the grid method. I'm sticking with my F pencil, and all I want to do is get the outline of our Poochie friend here penciled in, then at least I know that everything is accurate and I'm not digging in and doing a lot of hard work only to find out that my proportions are wrong or something's in the wrong place. So I really do, I cannot recommend this enough. So I usually just find a comfortable starting point. Now for me it's going to be this side of the picture. Again, being left-handed, I tend to work right to left so that I'm not smudging things and all the rest of it. And I'm just literally going to work square by square until I have his outline. Now obviously I'm not going to finish this picture today because it's hours and hours of work. I will be finishing this and I will be videoing it, and I will do it as a separate video once it's finished. So if you would like to see me talk a little bit more about the shading side of things and, you know, filling in the detail using the grid method, you can keep your eyes peeled for that video, but it will be a number of weeks before it's up. So starting here, this is an obvious place to start for me, and I've got this little half box here. Now again, I want to keep these lines as light as possible, and I'm just going to follow this curvature. And when I move into the next box, I can see that his back is almost touching the top of this line, and it starts to curve back round. So you can see how simple it is. It's like tiny bite-sized pieces. It makes things very, very easy to follow. Just remember as well, as you go along, just double check your grid references to make sure you are actually drawing in the correct box. So for example, when I'm coming into here, it's this box here, so I want to make sure I'm 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes down and my half box plus 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1. So there we go, I'm in the right box. Do that frequently, get into the habit of doing that, because it will stop you getting confused and making mistakes that you don't need to make. Okay, so I've got a bit of his ear here, which starts slightly down from the top. And again, I just want a really sort of loose line in there. I will go back, and these inner parts I do go back and refine, but we're just really talking about getting outline just now. But I just want to have that guideline there, because this part of his back comes down and it kind of cuts off where his ear is, and it's right up in this corner. So we want that to be about there. And then I can see a tiny speck of white, so that can just bring his ear up here. And so on and so forth all the way around. So I'm going to speed this part up so that you can get the gist of it without having to sit for hours watching this video. So I'll catch you up once I've done this outline. Okay, and there we have it. There is the finished outline. I will zoom in a bit just so that you can take a bit of a closer look. So you can see just very light lines all the way around, and I have literally taken it a box at a time. and making sure that my lines are in relation to what is on my reference image. And I've just worked my way around. I have put in a few extra lines here and there, and these are just guidelines for me for later on. But I know now that these lines are absolutely 100% accurate, so that now I start putting my detail in, that my drawing is going to be pretty accurate when it comes to the photograph. I hope some of you have found this useful today. As I say, please stay tuned. It will be a couple of weeks, but I will be finishing this drawing off entirely, and I'm going to talk a little bit about shading, particularly with animals that have mostly black fur. So you can look out for that if you're into that sort of thing. I want to thank you for taking the time to come and join me today in the cave. If you have any questions, then you can leave them in the comments, but I also welcome general comments as well, and you all know I love reading your comments. So thank you very much for watching once again, and we shall see you back in the cave really soon for another video. Have a good day everyone. Bye for now.